Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Have you ever witnessed the stark distinction between those who are chosen for privilege and those who have to fight for their own survival? Have you ever wondered, what would happen if the source of money that everyone depends on disappeared? This is my story, a story about money, comfort, and the consequences of a life built on a luxurious illusion. But also a story about independence, self-respect, and the cheap lessons my loved ones learned. Listen to this story until the end. Who knows, you might find a piece of yourself in it. The bright morning light filters through the windows, reflecting on the white walls of a Toronto high-rise apartment. It's Thanksgiving Day again. I opened my eyes, feeling a familiar weight, anxiety, tension, and a little bitterness. This year, my family's gathering place was not the cozy cabin in Muskoka, as before, but a lavish resort on the Vancouver coast. A place of luxury with meals costing more than $200 per person, and luxurious hotel rooms costing more than $800 per night, all paid for by my grandfather. I looked at myself in the mirror. The ref was the image of Victoria Adams, 34, a research director at a leading pharmaceutical corporation in Canada. I made $170,000 a year, lived alone, and relied on no one but myself. But despite building an independent life, I was still tied to complicated family relationships, old memories, and the paradise I had endured during my romantic years. I grew up with an unshakable belief, inculcated by my grandfather's teachings. Money is important, but the product is more important. He was an export businessman who built his real estate empire from scratch. I learned all the lessons about investing, financial management, and self-reliance from him. He was the only person in the family who truly understood me, recognized my efforts, but unfortunately, no one else in the family shared the same values. On the contrary, my sister, Stephanie, was a completely different story. Stephanie used to be a flight attendant, but after marrying a wealthy businessman, she decided to become a full-time housewife. Her lifestyle seemed perfect. Gorgeous house, fancy cars, 8-year-old daughter attending a prestigious private school. But behind the glitz was complete dependence on her grandfather. The mortgages, the club memberships, the lavish dinners at Michelin restaurants, all came from his account. I was used to seeing Stephanie flaunting her glamorous life on Instagram, the latest Chanel bags, the fancy parties, the lavish vacations. But I knew the truth behind those perfect photos. Without his support, my sister's life would fall apart in an instant. My parents were no different. They were enjoying their retirement years in an upscale community in British Columbia. But everything, from the down payment on a nursing home to the health insurance, was covered by my grandfather. They never showed me the same care they did for Stephanie. While I paid for my university education with scholarships and part-time jobs, Stephanie was given everything: tuition, living expenses, even luxury travel. I learned not to expect anything from them, but that didn't make the discrimination any less painful. I sighed, dragging my Samsonite suitcase toward the door. I wasn't looking forward to this vacation. Every year, the family reunion only reminded me more of the distance between me and them, a distance that couldn't be filled with money or pleasantries. On the way to Pearson Airport, I stared out the taxi window, contemplating the trip ahead. The resort, where we would meet one of Vancouver's most prestigious hotels, was a magnificent Gothic structure, a symbol of turn-of-the-century luxury. But despite the glamorous exterior, I knew that the reality of my family was as fragile as a sandcastle against a tidal wave. And this year, I had a feeling that wave was coming. As the plane touched down at Vancouver International Airport, the humid air and cool Pacific breeze made me shiver. I pulled my trench coat closer to me, adjusted my suitcase, and walked out of the terminal. A shiny black taxi was waiting at the entrance, and I stepped in and said to the driver, "The Fairmont Pacific Rim, please." The hotel was located right on the beach, overlooking the giant cruise ships, a perfect place to reflect my family's fake glamour. As I expected, as soon as I got out of the car, I saw my parents standing inside the lobby, whispering as if discussing something. My mother was wearing a beige silk dress with an exquisite lace collar, obviously newly purchased. My father was wearing a simple but expensive suit with shiny leather shoes. When our eyes met, they quickly looked away, pretending not to see me. I pursed my lips. Not surprised, just disappointed. I dragged my suitcase to the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile, checked the system and suddenly frowned. "I'm sorry, Ms. Adams, but I don't see your reservation." The words made me pause for a moment. I frowned, checking the confirmation email on my phone. But before I could say anything, a familiar voice rang out behind me. "Oh, Victoria, you're finally here?" Stephanie walked over, a sarcastic smile on her face. She was wearing a soft cashmere coat, a brown Hermes Birkin in her hand, a sparkling Cartier watch on her wrist. But her eyes weren't welcoming, they were triumphant. "That's strange. You don't have a reservation? Let me check." Her voice was mocking. The receptionist continued to swipe her fingers across the keyboard, her eyes filled with confusion. I could feel the curious glances from the guests around her. Stephanie shrugged, stepped closer, and said softly, but loud enough for me to hear, "You know, I only book rooms for real families." The words were like a direct blow to my chest. There was no room for me, because in her eyes, I wasn't real family. I took a deep breath and calmed down. "I understand." My voice was cold and decisive. No arguing, no pleading, just a heavy silence. My parents stood there, not saying anything. They didn't protest, didn't explain, they just stood at a distance, pretending to be uninvolved. I adjusted my grip on my suitcase, bowed politely to the receptionist, and pulled out my phone. I opened the taxi app, feeling strangely relieved. I was leaving. Stephanie was slightly surprised. Perhaps she expected me to be angry, to make a big deal out of it. But I didn't give her that privilege. Stepping out of the hotel lobby, I felt the afternoon sunlight on my hair, a light breeze blowing past, carrying the gentle scent of sea salt. I stood there, waiting for a taxi, quietly observing the luxurious view of the hotel in front of me. Inside, I caught a glimpse of my niece Amy standing behind my mother. The little girl was wearing a gorgeous princess dress, not suitable for an 8-year-old. I knew she was looking for me. "Amy." I quietly opened the suitcase, took out a small gift box, carefully wrapped, and inside was a pearl hair clip. I had chosen it carefully because I knew Amy liked simple but meaningful gifts. But now I no longer had the chance to give it to her. The taxi arrived. I got in, the driver's deep voice rang out. "Where are you going, miss?" I didn't hesitate. Vancouver Airport. As the car drove away, I glanced through the rearview mirror. The image of the magnificent hotel gradually shrank, reflecting the false vanity of my family. A sense of serenity filled my heart. I had made the right decision. But then my phone rang. It was from my grandfather. I picked up. "Victoria, what happened?" His voice was low and calm, but I could hear the edge to his words. I wasn't complaining. I wasn't whining. I was simply telling the story in its proper order. There was silence on the other end of the line for a long moment. Then he spoke slowly, word by word. "I understand. Let me handle this." As soon as the call ended, my phone exploded with text messages and missed calls. From Stephanie, from my parents, from the people who had been silent when I was pushed out. "Victoria, come back. Amy wants to see you. This is a disaster. Do you know what everyone thinks? Can you say something to Grandpa? Don't make a big deal out of this." I didn't answer. And then an email message came from Grandpa. "To the entire family, effective immediately, I am ceasing all financial support for George, Margaret, and Stephanie. The cruel treatment of Victoria has damaged the family's reputation. All those who live on my money but do not understand its true value will receive nothing more." I looked at the words, a small smile on my lips. The mask fell. The taxi continued to roll, taking me away from the illusion of luxury towards the freedom I deserved. The taxi rolled smoothly on the streets of Vancouver, taking me to the airport. The air inside the car was cool and quiet, a complete contrast to the storms of emotions swirling in the hearts of the people I had just left. My phone kept ringing. Missed calls from Stephanie, from her parents, From her husband, all of them came in waves. I did not answer. And then a new email from my grandfather appeared in my inbox, the subject line short but sharp as a knife. Final decision. I opened the email. Dear family, after the embarrassing Thanksgiving incident, I have decided to completely discontinue all financial support for George, Margaret, and Stephanie. As of today, not a single penny from me will be used to support your frivolous lifestyle. I had hoped that this family would learn the value of independence and responsibility. But I was wrong. To Victoria, I am proud of you. You have proven that honor cannot be bought with money. The rest of you should fend for yourselves. I let out a long breath, feeling more relieved than ever. Without his support, Stephanie's fragile financial system began to collapse like a domino effect. She tried to maintain a calm exterior, but after a few days, her Instagram went completely silent. No more pictures of her new handbag, no more fancy meals, no more luxury trips. I didn't need to see the posts to know what was going on. I knew she was panicking. Then a message came from Stephanie's husband. Victoria, I didn't know Stephanie had kept so much from me. She owed tens of thousands of dollars on her credit cards. We couldn't afford Amy's private school tuition anymore. She was devastated. I wasn't surprised. Stephanie had never earned a dime. Everything she had had was built on her grandfather's allowance. And now, without money, that facade was crumbling. Her husband began considering selling their lavish home in Oakville to buy a smaller, cheaper one. They also had to pull Amy out of private school and transfer her to public school. For the first time in her life, Stephanie was faced with a reality she'd never imagined. Life couldn't be lived on appearances alone. While Stephanie struggled with her debts, my parents were in a panic. They'd put down $150,000 for a condo in a senior living facility, planning to retire in absolute comfort. But now they can't pay the rest. An email from my mother came in the middle of the night. Victoria, we've been living with the wrong values. We thought money would always be available, but now, we really don't know what to do. Please help us just this once. I read that line over and over again, my heart aching. When I needed them, they never helped me. But when they were in trouble, they turned to me and begged me. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think. 2 weeks later, when I returned to my daily routine in Toronto, I noticed something strange. Stephanie had disappeared from social media. No more photos taken in Michelin restaurants. No more trips. No more boasting about her lavish lifestyle. Everything was empty. Maybe she finally realized. She was never really rich. She was just an actress, playing the role of a successful woman, when the truth was that everything she had came from others. Now, with the spotlight off, she had nothing left but her own naked truth. During those chaotic weeks, nothing changed in my life. I still went to work on time, still analyzed research data, still invested my money carefully. I even got promoted. My salary increased to $200,000 a year. I didn't need anyone to support me. I didn't need to show off on social media. I didn't need to pretend that I had a perfect life, because I had built a good life with my own hands. One day, while cleaning the house, I opened a drawer and saw the pearl hairpin that I had bought for Amy. I smiled slightly. Someday, when she's old enough, when she understands the true value of independence, of hard work, I will give her this hairpin, not as a gift, but as a symbol, a reminder that true worth lies not in outward appearance, but in the inner strength of each person. And then, perhaps, a new chapter will truly open. The storm has passed. My family now has to learn to live with the reality of no longer having support, no longer having illusions. My parents have to leave the luxury of a nursing home to live a more modest life. Stephanie has to learn to balance her spending instead of wasting on frivolous things. And me? I have lost nothing. I just continue my life, more stable than ever. Because in the end, as my grandfather once said, frivolity is for others. Stability is for you. 3 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, winter has enveloped Toronto in biting cold winds. I sit in my office, looking out the large window at the first snowflakes of the season falling silently onto the bustling street below. Everything in my life continued as usual. My research at the pharmaceutical company was still going strong, my investments were growing, and most importantly, I could still live without depending on anyone. But somewhere, the people who had turned their backs on me, Stephanie, my parents were now struggling in a reality they never dared to imagine. Stephanie's social media was still silent. No more pictures of fancy restaurants or lavish vacations. She had disappeared. I knew why. One night, while reading my emails, I received a text message from her husband, Nathan. "Victoria, I really don't know what to do anymore. Stephanie can't face reality. She's still spending as if we hadn't lost the support from Grandpa. She's been hiding her debts from me all this time, and now we're at the limit." I stared at the screen, not surprised. Since she was a child, Stephanie had always believed that money was something she took for granted. She didn't know how to save, didn't know how to manage her finances, and never thought about earning money through her own labor. Now, without his support, she was panicking. Nathan continued, "We had to sell our house in Oakville. Now we're looking for a smaller apartment. Stephanie is struggling with the fact that she can no longer live like a queen. But what worries me most is Amy. She doesn't understand what's going on, only that her mother isn't as happy as she used to be." I closed my eyes, my heart sinking. Amy. She's the only person in the family I truly care about. I opened my desk drawer and looked at the pearl hair clip I bought her for Thanksgiving. I never got the chance to give it to her, but I kept it as a symbol of hope. One day, Amy would understand. While Stephanie struggled with the loss of her luxury lifestyle, my parents faced a different fear, the insecurity of old age. My mother's emails came more frequently, but they were no longer filled with blame or criticism. Instead, they were pleas. "Victoria, we found a smaller condo in Vancouver, but the deposit we paid for the luxury nursing home is gone. We don't know how we'll manage living expenses and health insurance." I read the text, but my heart was still cold. They had thought they would always have someone to back them up. They had never planned for that source of income to be cut off, and now they were panicking. One evening, while I was reading research papers in my apartment, the phone rang. "Grandpa." I picked up. "Victoria, I need to talk to you." His voice was low and slow. I could feel the seriousness in each word. "I want you to take over all my assets." I was stunned. What did he say? I have thought a lot. Of all my grandchildren, you are the only one who understands the value of hard work and finances. I do not want my assets to be wasted on people who do not appreciate it. I was silent, trying to digest his words. I never expected this. I never thought that I would be the one to inherit all of your assets, because I have never needed it. You do not need to give me an answer right away, but I want you to think about it. Are you sure this is what you want? I have never been more sure. When the call ended, I looked out the window, where the city of Toronto was still quietly lit up in the cold night. A thought flashed through my mind. I have spent my life proving that I don't need to rely on anyone. But now, am I ready to be someone that others will rely on? I knew that if I accepted his offer, I would have the power to decide the financial fate of my family. And I would have to make the most important choice of my life. I stood up, poured myself a cup of hot tea, my mind still reeling with thoughts. My life was already stable. I didn't need this added responsibility. But at the same time, I knew that this wasn't just about money. It was about setting the right values for the next generation. It was about protecting what really mattered. It was about changing the way my family operated, no longer dependent, no longer having illusions of luxury. And perhaps this was my chance to truly rewrite my family's story. I picked up my phone and looked at the text message from my grandfather. An important decision awaited me. Which path would I choose? My grandfather's call lingered in my mind like an unanswered question. I could take over his entire estate, control the family's financial destiny, but would that make me part of the system I had always tried to escape? For years, I had watched money turn my family into vain, selfish, and fake people. I had fought to not be one of them. And now, I was at the most important crossroads of my life. I needed someone to listen, someone to give me an objective perspective, and I knew exactly who I would turn to. The next afternoon, I drove to a small coffee shop deep in Toronto's Old Town. My date was Daniel Carter, an old college friend who had chosen a completely different path than I had. While I was diving into the world of numbers, investing, and scientific research, Daniel chose to become a nonprofit financial advisor who specializes in helping people in financial difficulty rebuild their lives. He was one of the few people I could trust to give me advice that wasn't driven by personal gain. As soon as I sat down, Daniel looked at me with an understanding gaze. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm. I sighed, stirring the cappuccino in front of me. My grandfather wanted me to take over all his assets, control of the family finances. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And that's what you want?" I was silent for a moment. I didn't know. He nodded, resting his hands on the table. "There are two ways to look at this, Victoria. One is that you see it as a trap, something that pulls you back into whatever you were trying to escape. The other is that you see it as an opportunity, a way to change things." I looked at him, puzzled. "Change things?" Daniel chuckled. "I've seen how money can destroy a family. If you control your grandfather's assets, you can set new rules, rules that force people to take responsibility for their own lives." I leaned back in my chair, thinking about it. Maybe this isn't about controlling money. It's about reshaping my family's mindset. 3 days later, I called my grandfather again. "You're taking over my assets." My grandfather couldn't hide the satisfaction in his voice. "I know you'll make the right decision." But I didn't stop there. But I wouldn't continue to provide the way he used to. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I continued. "I'm going to set up a new system. Anyone who wants financial support will have to prove they're worthy. No more living lavishly on my money." My grandfather was silent for a moment, then laughed. "I like the way you think." And so, a new game began. After the plan was announced, my family was thrown into an unprecedented wave of chaos. Stephanie, who had never worked a day in her life, was now faced with the need to prove her financial ability before receiving any aid. My parents, who had grown comfortable in a senior living facility, now faced a big question. What would they do to support themselves? News of my new system spread quickly through the family. My father angrily emailed, "Victoria, you don't get to make these rules. This is Grandpa's money." My short reply was, "No, this is family money, and we will learn how to use it responsibly." I set up a family investment program that required anyone who wanted financial support to take a course in money management, investing, and budgeting. No exceptions. Stephanie had to learn how to earn money. My parents had to learn how to balance their retirement accounts. Amy would be taught the true value of money from an early age. Those who didn't follow, they got nothing. 3 months later, the magic happened. Stephanie, after months of struggling, finally found a job as an event manager. My parents learned to cut back, adapting to a simpler life. And Amy began to understand that money doesn't come from unlimited credit cards. I look back at everything that happened, and I realize something important. Financial independence is not about how much money you have. It's about how you control your life. My story is not just about my family. It's about a bigger issue than how we view money and the true value of life. If you are listening to this story, I want to ask you one thing. Are you in control of your money, or is your money controlling you? Are you living by your values, or are you chasing after a flashy illusion? If my story made you think, please share your feelings in the comments. And if you know someone who is stuck in a spiral of money and dependency, send this story to them. Because sometimes, we all just need a little push to change the way we see life. Choose your own path.